And yeah, so now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Janae Slocum, Director of the Riley Center for Media and Public Affairs, for some welcoming words.
Thank you, Maria. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Manship School. I'm pleased to have you at this event. This is one of my favorite events that we do, and we're really lucky to be partnered with the Public Affairs Research Council and Louisiana Public Broadcasting this year. So first of all, welcome everyone here and welcome audience. So as you know, leading up to the elections, the folks that are on our panel, they're trying to figure out what all the other campaigns are doing and make decisions based on that fit with their strategy. And in this event, we get to hear a little bit of what was going on behind those closed doors in an environment where they can share a few things. So it's always exciting to kind of hear what that strategy was. And so I want to share with you just who our panelists are and a little bit about them. We've got Corey Dennis, wave, all right, from Maryland, attended the U.S. Naval Academy and graduated with a degree in political science. He has served as political director and special advisor and press secretary in political campaigns and state government. Most recently, he served as the campaign manager for Governor-elect Jeff Landry. Welcome, Corey. Brandon Campbell, a New Orleans native, is an entrepreneur, integrated marketing guru, business strategist, and mentor with more than 13 years of experience in marketing and sales. His portfolio includes campaigns with well-known retail brands and owns a digital advertising firm. Mr. Campbell served as the campaign manager for candidate Sean Wilson. And Press Robinson has worked in politics and government for nearly 25 years. In 2023, he served as strategist and pollster for Lundy for Louisiana. His previous experience includes serving as Louisiana's Deputy State Treasurer for Management and Finance, Executive Director of multiple nonprofit organizations, and dozens of political campaigns around the nation. Welcome. And then we have, so Politics Magazine recently named Jason Hebert as one of the top 500 political influencers in America. He co-founded the political firm, after managing the Bush-Cheney 04 campaign in Louisiana and Colorado, winning key victories in both states. A former state Republican Party executive director and political director, Hebert is the veteran of over 350 campaigns in the last 22 years. We have two folks here conducting our interviews. The first is Stephen Procopio, who is the executive director for the Public Affairs Research Council. He has done lots of things, including heading the Public Policy Research Lab here at the Manship School, and also working in state government, and for some of you, also serving as one of our professors. So, welcome. Kara St. Sincere. Kara is a Baton Rouge native and graduated from LSU with a degree in mass communication. She was telling us earlier about having classes with some of our professors here. So welcome. Thank you for being here. She's with Louisiana Public Broadcasting. And so with that, I will hand it over to the two of you for questioning, starting with Steve.
Great. That's a good broad opening to start with. And Corey, if you wouldn't mind starting. So tell us a little bit about the overall campaign strategy. Like, what was your path to victory?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you again for having us here today. For us, I think we were fortunate enough to have a candidate in Jeff Landry that had won a statewide office before, gotten reelected, was a U.S. congressman prior to that, and people knew who he was. He had a record that had worked for him for so far. And so our main strategy was to let Jeff be Jeff and not try to change it up too much of what has worked for him in the past, and keep the message the same of crime, education, and economy. Those are three things that universally polled as the top three most important issues to people in Louisiana, and we felt that if we could stay on that message and he stayed on that message, we'd be successful.
Let me ask a little more specific. Because obviously your campaign strategy worked. But let's ask on sort of the technical, tactical things. What about like the forums and the campaigns? He didn't do as many of those as some of the other candidates. What was the thought process behind that for our particular campaign managers to be in the audience?
Yeah. So we didn't do as many, but we did do a lot of forums across the state. I think Jeff Landry's greatest strength is he's a people person. I think if you actually meet him, you immediately fall in love with him. So our strategy was to get him out to the public as much as possible, actually engaging with voters and citizens rather than sitting up on a stage here and not having a lot of back and forth. So that's where his strong suit was, and so that's what we tried to do, is try to get him out touching voters as much as possible.
Okay, great. Why don't we go down the line now and just talk about the campaign strategy?
Sure.
Obviously, I already covered it a little bit, but if you want to add in more detail.
Yeah, so I had a little bit more of a unique role in this campaign than most of the other gentlemen sitting up here, in that I was chairing a super PAC that was supporting Jeff Landry's candidacy for governor. And so when when you're in a super PAC, I always say you have the best strategy is to pick a lane and to stick in that lane. And our job was to sort of act, kind of, to use the rudimentary term of like a naval destroyer. Our job is to escort our carrier, our campaign, and to keep enemy aircraft and enemy ships from attacking them. So we have a very narrow focus. Our strategy typically will change from time to time depending on polling. I think probably we went into this campaign thinking that we were going to have to cover several lanes here, but ultimately the campaign ended up doing a very good job of getting its message out, raising the money it needed to do, and galvanizing a lot of the folks from the base. And so our focus became at that point very narrow, which was to really cap growth of any other campaigns out there that would threaten the base and maybe make some movement and force this race ultimately into a much more challenging role than it was. And I believe it worked, obviously, because we were able to go into one round, not two, which is unprecedented for those of you involved in Louisiana politics. I don't think it's ever happened in an open seat for governor where a candidate has won outright in a primary. So hats off to Corey and his team for that. So.
Well, great. Let's see. All right, so you represent in some degree a wild card, not affiliated with any particular party. Yep. So then what was your strategy, having to, you had to make your own lane?
It was a little difficult because when you are an independent, people tend to think of there's the Democratic Party and there's the Republican Party and then there's independents, but that's not really a party. That's more a feeling or a state of mind. It's people are registering as independent not just because they might consider a member of either party, but because they're feeling dissatisfied with the options that they have. And as we sat down to map out our campaign strategy, we had a couple of constraints. One of them was quite simply that there are people who tend to vote for a political party who won't consider people who aren't a member of that party. So we polled that, trying to identify where are the attainable votes for Hunter Lundy. The second thing that was very difficult was once you start taking off a certain number of votes that, for instance, Republicans were much more reluctant to consider a candidate who was not a Republican than were Democrats or independents. We said, we start to see that lane narrowing. Even if we were to go and compete for conservative votes, there's one leading candidate there. If he falters, there are 4 other Republican candidates there to pick up those votes. So we would have to convince people so much to jump over, we would run out of resources before we were able to get to the point of competition. So really it was largely just trying to identify where are people who are open to an independent.
All right, Brandon, sounded like he was trying to take your people. So, so your strategy in terms of how you could, at a tough job, you're following John Bell, who was a Democrat, but still a tough job in this state. What was your strategy if you did these 3 things or whatever they were, you thought you had a chance at winning?
Yeah, our strategy was really focused on name ID. I mean, we had a candidate that's a 25-year veteran working in the government, right, which was a huge plus. Not only that, he's highly qualified. He's probably one of the most qualified candidates in terms of experience. So our goal was to really just focus on our base, right? We jumped in and hit churches every Sunday, even during the weekdays. We were actively in churches. The second part of our focus was really to present him as a credible, balanced candidate that can work with everybody and also a unifier. And that's what we were pushing for. And I think that we were able to make a large dent. Of course, we just fell short.
Yeah.
So part of the campaign strategy these days is social media. It's almost impossible to run a campaign without one. So I'm going to bring this one to you, Mr. Avery. I'm going to start with you since we started with Corey last time.
Sure.
How did you use social media to campaign, and do you think that your strategy was effective?
Well, our social media strategy, again, kind of like our side of the campaign was narrow in the sense that we didn't have a candidate that we were pushing. Typically when you're running a campaign where you have a candidate, social media is much more impactful because that's how candidates are going to engage. When I started in this business a long time ago, websites were the thing, and you put up a website, and your website was sort of like your campaign headquarters online, and now over the course of the years, once social media, particularly Facebook and Twitter, and now Instagram, some of the other platforms have really sort of transformed the way we campaign. It's so much more about candidate direct engagement with the electorate. In our case, that wasn't the case. We would use, I would consider, the digital strategy, our effort through social media, putting up digital ads, static ads, video ads, those types of things. Much more message oriented, a lot less personality oriented than probably you saw from the campaigns themselves. It's weird. We're sort of now, I think, in the second iteration or cycle of online or digital or social media campaigning, sort of post-Trump era, where it's getting harder and harder, I think, for political campaigns to campaign using digital and social media because of a lot of the things that have transpired over that time frame now with Facebook changing algorithms and all these things. It's still, I think, really lends itself much more to the organic side of campaigning, which again is better off for the campaigns than a third-party group like I was involved in. But digitally, it's still important, and I think you have to commit some budget to it, and you can't ignore it. So.
I think there's a misconception in a lot of quarters that social media is somehow free. It is not. It is incredibly expensive to promote and share these things, to boost posts, to go and acquire followers, to go on an email acquisition binge. This stuff is phenomenally expensive. As we looked at it, social media was something we were doing, but we were going to rely on it organically for the majority of the campaign, simply because given the opportunity, I would rather keep moving forward with the messaging that we wanted and the media that we were creating rather than pay to tell people, Mr. Lundy was in a diner in Simsboro. It just wasn't a good use of our resources as we viewed it.
And then what about you?
One thing that we knew, and this is from working with past campaigns, is that if we invest in content that look organic, right, and we gave our candidate an opportunity to just have real conversations with people and catch those moments, we knew that we could take advantage of the organic shares. So one part of the strategy and what we really did with social media is really focused on producing organic content. We did that out the gate. We saw huge returns on that. It helped with one, it helped us understand what people wanted to see more of, right? Because we do social listening and all those things. And then it also gave us another backup in addition to comparison with the polls and how we need to message and things we need to change. So to your point, yes, it is costly, but the organic piece, out the gate is something that we decided to do because we know that we needed a whole budget and wait to GOTV and early voting to really make a push for ads.
All right, I've been notified that I talk very low, so I was given a microphone. But I did want to ask you a follow-up question. You mentioned authenticity, and that was a really important part for you in your social media strategy. Can you give me an example of a post or a social media tactic that you used that was organic and authentic?
Yeah, so we started, we did a statewide small town tour, right? So we went in small rural communities, Ville Platte, and we talked with, people at restaurants. We talked with local officials about their needs and things that they were concerned about, right? And that capturing these moments, I think, helped this campaign get to where we were, and budget, of course. I mean, look, it's costly, right? And if we had more budget to do more of that content, I'm quite sure things could possibly look different, right? But those are the type of things that we did.
So I'm going to go back to you because you've been almost skipped. But let's talk a little bit about social media strategy. I know that Mr. Hebert talked about it a little bit, but let's have you elaborate.
I mean, kind of summing up what everyone else said is we tried to use social media to, again, let Jeff be Jeff. So we had a great social media team that put a lot of cool, fun graphics together, but we also wanted to emphasize the human nature of it and get more of that organic post to save some of that budget. And I think one of our best, if not best, Facebook posts was a picture of Jeff and Miss Sharon eating a slice of pie at a small town diner in North Louisiana. And it didn't mention politics, it didn't mention go vote, it just said, small town America or something like that. And I think to this day, it's like probably our best post. So we tried to use social media to show the human side, not just the attorney general, congressman, businessman, but the person. And ultimately, I think it worked out well for us.
Yeah, so it goes back to the authenticity, making sure that everything is organic. Mm-hmm. So the next question that I want to ask about social media strategy is maybe a little bit of a difficult one, but do you think that there was any candidate that utilized social media better than your candidate or your campaign? I'm not going to start with anybody. You guys have the floor.
Well, go ahead.
I would say that especially early on in the campaign, there was a lot of buzz about Richard Nelson and what he was doing on Instagram and the short videos that he was putting together. And it was impressive, and it was really giving you a sense of who Richard was and why he was running and what kind of governor he might be. It also gave you the caution, though, because as much as those of us on the inside of the fishbowl were paying attention to what Richard was doing, when you looked, you saw he had 1,000 followers on Instagram at the time. And so a campaign that, he had headwinds like all of us have, but so much of his time was going into producing this great content that no one got to see. It was something that I used with some of the people on our team as a reminder of, it's great that we can make it, but if nobody can see it, what are we doing here?
Anybody else?
I was just going to say, press beat me to it. I was going to mention Richard. I thought he used Twitter very effectively in a way that he dealt with a lot of the rapid response. I thought the Wilson campaign's social media was good from what we could tell. I mean, I think everybody had a good strategy with it. The problem, I think, a lot of times now is, and you mentioned Jeff and Sharon eating a slice of pie. I mean, it's funny the way that, Facebook will now do these engagement algorithms and how you're basically, you have to be there with food or dogs or children or all these little things that cause different types of engagement. It's just a constant learning process, and it lends itself, and I'm glad to look out in this crowd and see a lot of young faces, because I think, those are the ones that are shaping that landscape in terms of how we're campaigning now. I can tell you that, in the old days, you got out, you went to a campaign event, you took a picture, you posted it, and it got equal engagement, depending on where you were and who you were with. Now there's so many other factors involved in it, and so I find like the younger generation is really, really skilled at it, and so I thought Richard did a really good job.
And I have to add, social media is becoming more complicated. I'm struggling with keeping up with all the different platforms. I cannot believe all of you can keep up with that. But did you want to talk about Anybody
Yeah,
else?
I think there was one point, and actually it was with the Lundy campaign, and it was supposed to, I think, early vote. They made a decision to work with some influencers, or they did a good job at identifying influencers in the community and post on blogs. Now, usually that is something that I would, do with my company or work with whatever social media team that we have, and we really. During COVID, the campaigns that happened during COVID, that was a major strategy that we would normally have activated, and it was good to see, or not good to see, but it was concerning when I saw that the Lundy team had activated that piece. So.
And to jump in just for a second, I won't use names because I don't want to embarrass anybody, but we do have some people from the Lundy campaign who are here today, and one of them was spending a lot of his time doing that. They did a great job.
And then lastly, do you have anything you want to add, Mr. Dennis?
My favorite social media other than ours was the stuff I saw Jason's group do for Jeff. So, no, I do think I haven't done as many campaigns as these gentlemen, but I feel like there's a point of campaign where you kind of see some off-the-wall video posts, something, some staffer thought they were on theirs and on the campaigns. But I think all the campaigns this year did a really great job of staying disciplined. You didn't have any tweets or Facebook posts or anything that needed to be talked back or deleted. So I think that's a pretty clean campaign cycle that doesn't happen too often these days.
So a lot of you mentioned how social media was changing, and that did change the campaign landscape for a lot of you, but there is funding changes that were happening. It's difficult to campaign and build the right funding. There were changes with direct funding, with PACs, especially for you, since this is something that you focus on. Do you want to talk about the changes to that financial aspect of campaigning?
Yeah, so super PACs and fund. I guess the way we run campaigns now through independent expenditures has changed a lot. It's initially since the Citizens United decision, and now it's kind of grown. But we were organized as a super PAC. Our job was that we could raise unlimited funds. We could not coordinate with the campaign. It's not unlike, and I don't know if any of the other gentlemen, the other two up here, had super PACs that were set up to run alongside their campaigns. But it's not a new trend, but it's fairly new in the sense of running big races. Not much has changed in terms of other third parties getting involved. We did see a lot of other third parties come in. Spend some money on behalf of, whether it's to support Jeff or maybe it's to support another candidate. Then you also had, on top of that, you had both the Republican and the Democratic governors associations, and they'll play in these campaigns. I don't know, I remember the RGA played in this campaign quite a bit. I don't remember if the Democratic Governors Association did or didn't, but that's another avenue, and that's another, again, independent expenditure. What I thought probably Jeff Landry did really well, and I was trying to go back in my brain and think about when the last time this ever happened, which was they went hard early to get the endorsement from the state Republican Party. And once in our state, unlike most states, we're a jungle primary state, so there's no primary. You don't actually run for your party's primary and then become your party's nominee, and then you face off in a general election against a Democrat or whomever. So our party rules are a little different in that you have to actually go out and get the party's endorsement. And once you do that, there is a coordination level there that can happen and also provide some other fundraising avenues. And so I thought that was really unprecedented, and that was probably a big difference maker, in this race, because as you go back and you look at the 2019 race and the 2015 race, there was always that, some of you may have followed it, the narrative was that, well, there's going to be one Democrat running and there's going to be multiple Republicans and they're going to fight and cannibalize each other, and the party's going to sit this one out, and then all of a sudden, one of them's going to make it in a runoff against a Democrat. Now we've got 30 days for everybody to hold hands and sing Kumbaya and come together. And in the last two elections, that didn't happen, or at least, the previous two elections. So I thought it was great in that the Landry campaign saw that problem early on, went after the endorsement. got the endorsement, and that allowed a much more robust fundraising effort and coordination. So.
Anybody else want to talk about how this election cycle differed from previous elections with funding? I'm going to pick someone.
I'll volunteer then. One of the challenges was there's a different level of expectations that you will be able to raise money through certain avenues, because it's happened successfully at the national level and with some candidates who have a persona which lends itself to email fundraising. It tends to be very fiery rhetoric. It's, we have to save our side from their side. As an independent, we were kind of locked out of that game. But I know that is something that, there's a lot of expectation. Well, why don't we buy an email list? I'm like, well, because we can't buy an email list. Why are we not getting a lot of contributions online? The level of attention that people had for this race, and frankly, the level of interest in this race among Louisiana citizens, as shown in the turnout that we ultimately saw, really meant that this wasn't going to be a low-dollar race. One of the things that was such a big advantage on the Republican side for Mr. Landry is that endorsement and the avenues that it opened up for them to coordinate with and work with the state party. So that allowed big checks to come in. This was a big check race, not a small check race.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I think what really worked well for us when it came to the large dollar donations. Sean had great relationships. Coming from the transportation with his transportation background, so the unions really showed out well. What we were challenged with, since Jeff did seek the endorsement of the Republican Party very early on, trial lawyers and the normal funders that would probably have come to our side were gone, right? So it was a complete opposite funding apparatus than what we saw with John Bell, right? John Bell was able to get those people, and then also just donors around the state. They were particularly Democrats, of course, but also the middle ground. And those donors didn't necessarily translate to a donor for Sean, and probably some votes as well.
And circling back to you, anything to add?
No, I think what Jason said was right on the nose. The endorsement of the state party was huge for us and for our campaign, and we were very humbled and honored to receive that, and kind of started organically through the party, not from us, and it did open up a lot of doors for us financially, and allowed us to work closer with them earlier on, where they could do some things that we couldn't do, or they now had more resources to support the Landry campaign, and ultimately some of the other Republican candidates throughout the race too.
I would add to that, I thought the Landry campaign, one of the things that Neil did particularly well early was going out aggressively and trying to cultivate relationships with people who, if you started a year out, said, well, this person gave to Jeff Landry, you say, no, that they are on the other side of some issue. But there was definitely a intentional effort to do that, and I think it paid off for them and made life a little more difficult for us.
All right, well, that's a sort of a good question to wrap it up before we get to the audience. So hindsight's 20/20, and there's always room for improvement opportunities. I'm going to start on this side, but probably want to spend more time with y'all. Knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? I know y'all won, so it's hard on y'all side. You could always do something better.
I'm going to let Jason answer, and I'll come back.
Jason, what mistakes did you make, as I think is what he's
well, I don't know if it's necessarily a mistake. I think, but so much as, when you're reading polling, you're watching, you're wanting to see, what other candidates are going to start surfacing above kind of how we see this race playing out. I think, there was a point in time where we felt like the Lundy campaign was going to catch fire, particularly when you know, the RGA was hitting Sean pretty hard, and we, you know, I think we took that into account. We obviously were watching that very closely. I really thought that it was going to probably create a bigger problem for us sooner than it did. And so I don't know if it's necessarily a mistake we made, but I think probably accounting for that on the front end probably would have been a little bit better, knowing that, okay, if votes are going to bleed off of Sean, where are they going to go? We talked about this, I think, before this started. You know, you got to be careful that when negative advertising affects one candidate, somebody's going to be the recipient of that vote. And it's not always going to be your guy, and it's not always going to be the person that you want to be the recipient of it. And so that when you get, anytime you get a multi-candidate field like this and you get so many people running, there's all these scenarios that you can't necessarily account for. And so there was a point there where I think we were worried that was going to happen, but luckily it didn't. But we had a plan ready for it. So
Okay. So lessons for future campaign managers in the audience and online. What lessons what would you do differently, or maybe what's the lesson for others?
For our part, I think the thing that we would do differently is probably try and go up with paid media a little bit earlier. In the summer, we were looking at it, and we had the challenge of Lundy wasn't known, but if we went up too early and the public wasn't ready to start paying attention, we were going to exhaust our resources, and we were going to have empty pockets in September and October. We couldn't let that happen. And so in protecting that back end, we probably needed a little bit more time up front. If we could have gone up on radio, we had a long radio run in this race. If we had gone on radio in May or June, we might have gotten a little bit more of a toehold that let us move forward and raise more money to then backfill September and October. But, you know, particularly when your candidate has contributed a large amount of their own money to it, you have an obligation to guard it a little more carefully.
All right, Brandon, last word before we take some other questions.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I mean, look, you know, as the campaign manager, right, I have to own it, right? I have to take full responsibility of you know, where we landed today, and I do that, and I have, and of course, there's tons of reasons why, right? I mean, we started late, right? If we had, you know, 5 more months, I mean, this would be a different scenario, situation. Money would have been different. I think we would have had an opportunity to really engage voters and have them understand who Dr. Wilson really is as a man, as a husband, as a father, as a grandparent, right? And we just didn't have that opportunity to tell that full story. And then also here, and this is something I hope you guys take with you. You know, people need something to vote against, right? It's particularly when you're trying to motivate black voters, right? And that was our base, right? And unfortunately, we, you know, played it down the middle, right? We played safe too long, and we didn't have that opportunity to convey what's really at stake, right? And, you know, as a result, we have Jeff Landry as governor, and I, you know, hope that, you know, we are all able to work together. But I think if people really understood what the changes were going to be, right, then they would have, you know, voter turnout would have been completely different, and that's where I think we missed the mark.
Well, great.
All right. So we are still getting those audience questions together. Does anybody else want to comment on the low voter turnout? I mean, this was a historic low for voters in Louisiana. Do you think that affected your campaign? I mean, well, of course it did, but how so? And is there anything you would have done differently to get more people out there to vote?
I'll take this. I think that the low turnout moves hand in hand with what I mentioned when we opened, the rising registration and independent and no party. It's a sign of a deep dissatisfaction with the system we have built for elections. In every election, a consultant like us is in the room with their guy and saying, I think we're okay, But if we run this negative ad, I'm sure we're okay. And we think about it and we go, well, it's business. We do what we got to do. But over a long period of time, when you do this, when we run these negative ads, it isn't that it's bringing people to us, it's that it's keeping people home. And I think what we're seeing is the result of this kind of advertising happening year after year after year. Now, we kept a lot of people home. We were 39,000 votes fewer than October of 19 in East Baton Rouge, 30,000 votes less in Orleans Parish, and we saw this across the state. People did not like the options that they were given, and that doesn't necessarily mean the candidates or the campaigns, but they didn't have a sense that it really mattered who won. And that's something that's going to take a lot of time to repair.
Then I want to bring this question back to you because in your response for Stephen's question, you were talking about the black vote, which is, of course, very important here in Louisiana, but you were talking about black vote, and the turnout for black voters was historically low this year as well. Is there anything that you think that you could have done differently to reach this group?
Yeah, I think that we, in hindsight, we as the team, we looked at finances and we decided to hold budget. I wish we would have spent a little more sooner and also aggressively go and move forward with the field with our ground game. Right, that was one piece that we didn't have a chance to operate for several different reasons. Right, one, our coordinated agreement with the party that came together really late. We were trying to cover a large state. So the media became the focus, digital media, radio, TV, and some billboard. But yeah, I wish I would have moved forward with some spending the money a little earlier.
So a related question, and I think this is for everyone, but let's start again with you. What do you think accounts, and we're starting to get questions from the audience, so what do you think accounts for the low voter turnout overall, but particularly with the black community?
I think people are just tired, right? When we looked at the early voting, the daily counts of the early voting numbers, it was unusual, right? We saw white voters voting more, and usually it's the other way around. So I knew there was a problem, right? I was concerned. And daily it just increased and it increased. But I think that, black voters, particularly, they just didn't believe that, one, and this is another thing I did not mention, we also we had to fight the fight of convincing people that a black man, right, a black man can actually be governor in Louisiana, right? I never forget when Obama wasn't Obama, right? But he was at the start of running, and I saw a magazine, and at the time I was working in corporate, and I don't know what magazine it was, and my general manager walked by, and he said, and I'm looking at him like, yeah, right. He said, it can happen. He's a white guy, and I'm like, I didn't believe. I'm like, a black guy can't do it. So you take that, and you take a Sean Wilson, who has been working in government for 25 years, and highly qualified, highly intelligent, and a good man. But how do you convince a demographic, to say, hey, you know what, this can happen, and they're seeing all of the other things around them before the attack ads started. The attack ads actually helped us because it helped increase our name ID. So thank you for that. I was like, yeah, that's perfect. Good pictures. That's the right picture to use. Perfect. But but yeah. So I think people tired. They're it's just voter apathy. They just didn't believe that, one, their vote really counts, and also the second piece is, can a black man really win? Why would I even show up?
So related to both of that, so some of his overall apathy, and I'll come to y'all, but how much was it Landry was so far ahead there's no point in going because this thing is already over. So but I want to ask, was that even something y'all considered? Like, if we can get so far ahead, we can just stop other people from even showing up.
Well, it's not something I considered from that side of it. I was concerned that people would think it was over before it was and that our people wouldn't show up. So I think some of the things we've talked about in the last couple of minutes is a lack of excitement for the election. I think that's why you get a lower turnout. I mean, frankly, I think our campaign and Jeff worked really hard to get our people out to vote. And I think fortunately for the voters that did show up, they were very excited about voting for Jeff, I think. It was interesting, too, that a couple weeks after election, I think Jeff received 10 or 15% of the black vote in Louisiana, which is unheard of for a Republican. So I'm going to let the experts write a book about that in a week, another year or two. But, I think we all want more people to be engaged with the election process, but I do think people were tired, fed up, not excited. And I do think the people that did show up did know what we had to offer and knew the changes that were coming. I think, crime was the number one issue, and I think the people that came out and voted for Jeff knew that there was going to be a change. He's a change agent type of guy, and even if they weren't traditionally supporting him, the crime issue was enough to back him up.
So before we move on to this next question, I just want to make sure that everybody's gotten the chance to answer. Does anybody want to add anything before we move on? No? Okay. Well, Mr. Robinson, this question is directed to you.
Oh, good.
So Lundy ran for Congress as a Democrat and nearly won. Why did he decide to run as an independent, especially considering the Democratic field was wide open when Lundy announced?
Mr. Lundy became an independent, I think, about 8 years ago. 1996 was a long time ago. And in 1996, I think John Kennedy, Bill Cassidy, Billy Tozan, all of these people were Democrats at the time. For some of our voters who are younger, it may be hard to imagine, but there was a time not that long ago when Louisiana was entirely dominated by Democratic candidates. And if you weren't a Democrat, you didn't get to compete in the election. Now we're in a situation where that is flipped. In many places, if you're not a Republican, you don't get to compete. Ultimately, though, the partisanship became something that I don't think he was comfortable with, and there was more to it than just the political strategy. As a strategist, I could sit down and say, if Hunter and I were having this conversation, I'd say, you have a better chance of winning in a runoff if you're an independent, but you have a better chance of getting to a runoff if you're a Democrat, so pick your poison.
All right. So this next question is for everybody. If you were not supporting your candidate, who would you support? It's definitely an interesting one.
Gosh. Well, I think if I were not supporting Hunter, and I'll preface this with, except for Mr. Wilson, I know all of the other candidates in this race. I've met with them and had lunches with them and worked with them and lobbied them over the years for various things, and there were a lot of good people. I probably was closest to John Schroeder, but for this race, because I think the lack of excitement and the lack of interest was such a significant problem for Louisiana's future, I probably would have gone with Richard. Plus I love long shots, but Richard, I thought, put together some really interesting things, and I suspect we're going to be hearing from him some more in the future.
You did mention him earlier. I think you complimented his campaign's social media strategy,
Yeah,
so I
they did
kind of
great
figured
on
that one
social
was
media.
coming.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to take a crack at this one? Who would you support if not your candidate?
I would agree with Press on Richard. I like he had a lot of good ideas, and I fully think he could be governor someday. I truly mean that. He's participated in some of our transition meetings as well, so I think he's very smart, very bright, and I think we'll see him on a ballot again sometime real soon.
Right. Mr. Brandon?
Yeah, it would have had to be Hunter Lundy. I just think that the way he messaged and the way he came off in moments was really authentic. and I think his ideas and the way he conveyed them and what he stood for, I think it made the most sense for a Democratic voter, right? So yeah, that's who I would have went with. Sorry.
All right, and that just leaves you, Mr. Hebert.
I don't know if there's one particular, but I have had a long-standing relationship with both Stephen Wagasback and John Schroeder. I've worked with both of them. I've known them for years. I think both of them, there's a canvas you could have painted, probably although differently with either one of them. Schroeder with his law enforcement background, military background, Wagasback with a little bit of his business background. I would have been fine, I think. Had let's said, Jeff Landry wasn't running, I think probably I'd give both of them a hard look. So.
All right, great. So a lot of interest in turnout, and this is, so I'm quoting this question. Lots of my friends don't vote because they say their vote won't make any difference. What are the reasons people should vote, even if their vote is in the minority? So people think their vote doesn't matter. What can you tell them that it does? Let's start down here and come this way.
I mean, I think just at the truest level, every vote does matter. I saw a meme or graphic a number of years ago that it was a bunch of people raising their hands saying I voted, and then 2/3 more people saying I didn't vote because my vote doesn't matter. And that obviously, if those people would have voted, that could change any election. So I think your vote does matter. Historically, people under 35, 25 or younger don't vote until they're in their early 40s. Votes matter. Elections have consequences, good and bad. If you don't vote, I believe you don't get to complain about it for 4 years. So if you want to make a difference, get involved in your campaigns, get involved with the voting process, and research the candidates. Even like on my ballot, there was a number of Republicans and a number of Democrats. I looked through all of them. And I would encourage y'all to do the same and tell your friends to do the same.
Oh, me? Okay. Well, this, you got to remember, we're up here talking about the governor's race, but that wasn't the only thing that was on the ballot on Election Day. And we were talking about this prior to coming down here. I was fortunate enough to do several races this year in Louisiana. One of them was for sheriff in Caddo Parish, and our candidate lost by 1 vote. 43,000 votes. It's now in a recount, so they're going through that legal process as we speak. That's an important elected office if you think about it, sheriff. Press and I were talking where he was involved in the judges' races where they won by 2 votes. Our judges are really now, I think, more so on the front line in the state and federally too, when we start talking about important policies and things and decisions that are going to be made. So your vote matters more so than just in the top of the ticket. It matters all the way down. And it has such a great impact on not just the state, but your local community. And I think oftentimes we don't think about that. We want the top of the ticket to drive turnout. You'd asked about why turnout was so low, and obviously there was an enthusiasm issue. I know when I was doing a lot of press interviews, it seemed like no matter who you were talking to, the consensus was, man, this is just such a quiet election. And you have to also remember too, because I was trying to do the math in my head. This is my 7th odd year Louisiana election cycle doing this. In 2007 was the first time term limits ever kicked in the legislature. And what that did was that set in motion for every 12 years. Now, these seats will open prior to that, but most of the time you're going to see that 12-year turnover mark. And we went through that in 2019. And if you look at 2011, which was a comparable year to this year in terms of the turnout, in fact, I think the turnout in the gubernatorial race in 2011 was lower than it is now. Now, granted, that was Jindal running for re-election. It was not an open seat. Typically, the open seat turnout's a lot higher. And I say that because there was not as many people running on the ballot, and there were a lot of incumbent candidates who were not challenged on the smaller or the lower end of the ballot. And that affects everything up and down the ballot as well. And so, I think a lot of times we want to tell people, you need to vote, it's important that you vote. And that, of course, I mean, why wouldn't we say that? But I think the other thing we're not saying is you need to run. You need to run for election. And you don't necessarily have to run for election for governor or Congress out of the gate. You don't. And you can play an important role in your community by being a justice of the peace or an alderman or a city councilman or whatever it is. Because, and look, you know, we're very fortunate in Louisiana. I do a lot of races outside the state. It is really hard to get on the ballot. In Texas, there's an expensive qualifying fee. In Arkansas, it's really expensive. In Colorado, where I've done races, you actually have to either petition to get on the ballot to run. This is just a run. You either have to petition or you have to go to a local convention and get delegates to vote you onto the ballot. I mean, in Louisiana, you just walk in, you pay a qualifying fee, provided that you meet the domicile rules, and you're a candidate. And so over the years of doing this, what I've seen is less and less participation by people, because I think more so, I think someone said they feel like their vote doesn't count. Also, they feel like, well, this is not for me, and I don't have any place in government, and you would be shocked at how well you might actually do, and how important it is that we need you in those positions.
Right. And generate some hope for our last two. Anything else in terms of words of encouragement on why people's vote matters and why they need to get out there?
I mean, I would add, you know, in addition to all the civic responsibility and the great impact it has on your community, it also matters in terms of what media you get to consume. When we sit down and say as a campaign, okay, who are we trying to reach? We're going to be looking at a voter file, and when we do mail, when we do any sort of outreach, when we do digital advertising, we're going to a voter file and we're looking to communicate to people who have a track record of voting. If someone has chosen not to participate, there's an entire campaign going on that, because of the communications tools we have today, they're not going to see.
I don't know if anyone thought about that. So
Yeah.
that's one.
Look, it's extremely important to vote, right? There's never not a reason to, one, take time and research a candidate, even if you're not communicated to. You know, your duty is to stay engaged. So that's the first piece. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, yes, this cycle was quiet, right? There was a lack of enthusiasm across the board and interest, but it's our duty, right? We're supposed to take responsibility and know when an election is coming and research the candidates and vote, but not only vote. You know, we need to tell friends, we need to bring our family, we need to do all of the things to get engaged and our community active. So yes, and look, voting matters. Your vote definitely counts. I've had races I've been on where I predicted that we're going to win by 50, and we lost by 50. You know, so and I was going to reference that Whitehorn race because I thought that was amazing that happened. But you know, one vote can make the difference. So do it.
All right, so we're getting short on time, so I'm going to ask this last audience question. Again, this is for every single one of the panelists. What was your campaign's biggest fear, and how, if at all, did you work to prevent it from happening? And of course, besides, you know, not winning the election, you can't answer that. That's been put in quotes here. But what was your campaign's biggest fear, and how did you work to prevent it from happening?
I'll start. You know, I think the biggest fear was running out of money, right? And that's probably more personal on me since I'm, you know, responsible for the budgets at that level. That was the biggest concern on my end. So we did a fairly good job at managing that, and hats off to the candidate for actively fundraising to support that to make sure we have funds on hand. Of course, not making the runoff. Yeah, I mean, look, we you know, even though it was a short run, we thought that if we do what we were doing, we run that play, we would make the runoff. We just did not expect voter turnout to be so low, and it caught us off guard. And I think if we would have adjusted our strategy and made it a race between Jeff and Sean earlier, spent a little more money in advance, I think it would have been slightly different.
I think our greatest fear was people looking at an independent and losing faith that it was possible, that an independent could actually be competitive in a race. And as you know, we were moving through September, our ads were up, our internal polling, we were moving. We had gone from 1 to 3 to 5 to 7 and up to 11. And then WDSU was hosting their debate, and WDSU came out and said that we were not going to be invited to participate. And that was really a gut punch for us. You know, we showed them multiple other public polls that did not conform with what they had, but it was going to create a lot of problems for them if they ceded the point. So they dug in, and we were put in a position of, do we sue them and say, you know, you're unfairly excluding us because you made a mistake, at which point the only media we get is more attention on you weren't invited to the debate. For the independent candidate, people losing faith that this next to impossible thing is at least just a little bit possible was the danger. And that one was probably the hardest blow we took in the campaign.
Yeah. I would say two things. Kind of what Brandon said, the money aspect, in the sense that, you know, when you're running an independent expenditure, you're not a campaign, so you don't have the candidate's ability to raise the money. So obviously we wanted to make sure we had the resources to withstand the time frame in which we had to run our effort. Probably second would be, you know, would we have inadvertently created or built up one candidate by defining another? And again, there was just so many candidates in this race. The opportunity for that was there. You know, thankfully it didn't go that way, but you know, you always worry about that, certainly when you're running a super PAC with multiple candidates, particularly multiple Republican candidates. So I think that was probably the other part of it.
Yes, mine is less more so about the campaign and more personal. Kind of what Brandon said, I was the campaign manager, so it's my responsibility to run the race. And it was my first time running a statewide race. And I felt very confident about the plan that we had set forth with Jeff. And one of my biggest fears was that we as a staff were going to do something to get us unorganized or miss a cue or misstep. So we met, I mean, every day we just kind of went through the schedule, reworked any problems, and just made sure that we were diligent about putting together the best team for Jeff. Because I thought, you know, maybe I'm biased, but I really thought Jeff was a phenomenal candidate and had a good plan if we could execute it. And fortunately, it worked out.
All right, so we are out of time for our portion. We are going to turn it back over to Dr. Slocum.
Thank you, Kara and Steve and panelists. Can we give them a round of applause? And thank you to everyone in the audience for taking the time. Only a few days after the Thanksgiving holiday. One of my fears for this event is always that it's coming so close to a big holiday, but as we can see, it's always exciting, and people always want to come and hear what folks have to say who've been working on these campaigns. I'd also like to thank Louisiana Public Broadcasting and PAR for being partners with us on this event. They're always wonderful partners. And I also want to make sure that I thank our Riley Center and Manship School staff. If you don't know, the Riley Center is run primarily by graduate assistants and undergraduate student interns, and without them, these events wouldn't happen. So could we please give them a round of applause too? And just so you know, you can see a recording of this event if you want to watch it again or catch a few things you might not have been able to hear on our YouTube channel at the Manship School. It will also be available on LPB's website, I believe. And we don't have our list of events ready for you for next semester, but be on the lookout for all of our exciting events and programs that will be coming up in the spring. So again, thank you for being here.